These are 5 tips to avoid taking damage in Apex Legends. If you apply them, I promise you're going to see instant results in your gameplay. So let's get into it. Tip number 1. Try to never allow yourself to be open up to multiple enemies at once. This is obviously an ideal situation, but of course there will be times where it's just not possible or you misread the situation and boom, 2 guys are shooting at you. However, it's what you want to strive for each and every fight. Now, every fight I go into, I'm assessing what part of the map is it on, what specific terrain is best to be in, and where do I believe all 3 of my opponents are. Great players will enter fights on a slower approach until they feel like they have this figured out. Now, once they know where everyone's at, that's when they strike. Having more than one person shooting at you at the same time will not only make you take significant damage, but it's also just going to kill you much quicker. A lot of players tend to develop a tunnel vision on just one enemy, and while yes, at times this can be helpful because certain players will need your sole focus, you still always have to think about fights in multiple waves. Very rarely is it just a solo that you're taking a fight against. And so many times I will hear players say to me, well, I get one player really low and I go to push them, but I always die to their teammates in some different angle or area. And this is because players are not actually considering where the other 2 enemies are when they go to push. So if you're dying like this a lot, you need to spend more time assessing before pushing up into stuff you don't know too much about. And this is what I mean by multiple waves. Dying to kill one enemy is not what you want to strive for. Sure, it's not the worst case scenario because it's a trade at the end of the day, but you're still leaving your teammates in a 2v2, and if you're solo queuing, well, we all know how that could go with random teammates. If in your next fight you assess one guy on the far left, but 2 are spread out on the right, and you realize you can get to that guy on the left while simultaneously blocking the other 2's line of sight by taking a specific route, then of course, this is what you want to be doing. But no matter how good you are, it's always extremely difficult to take out more than one enemy at once. So keep this in mind. If you enjoyed the first tip and you're not already subbed, please go ahead and subscribe so that you can learn more about improving at Apex. I'm getting really close to 100k subscribers and it would mean a lot to me if you hit it. Tip number 2, the 50-50 rule. This is a really important tip that I've mentioned in some previous vids, but the concept is simple. When initiating contact with an enemy team, you want a portion of your screen covered with cover. 50% of your screen utilizing cover is a solid spot to be in, but it doesn't always have to be 50%. Sometimes it could be like 80% if you're abusing a head glitch, or other times it could be as low as just 20% if the only cover near you is some small rock or tree. The idea behind all of this is if you're utilizing some cover, not only are you in theory a harder target to hit, but you also have some flexibility when it comes to using heals or reloading during the fight, or even repositioning so you don't have to take tons of unnecessary damage. Now, I'll get into some of that stuff later in the video, but I want to mention how some people have misinterpreted this tip in the past, so let me clarify a couple things. First is, you really don't need to abuse cover like this if you clearly have the better of the damage blows in a 1v1 fight. Let's say I take 20 damage, but I deal 100. Well, I'm gonna give up my cover if it means I need to push that guy and secure the kill sooner. I don't want to sit behind my cover while that player goes and presumably heals up. And then the second thing is if you can secure the knock while still remaining behind or near that cover, then of course this is what you want to strive for, especially if that player still has remaining teammates. And this is often most common when players have high ground. They feel the need to give it up and drop on the player to get closer to them when they could still just stay on high ground and beam the player while they're stuck on low ground. Remember, high ground is leverage in a fight, and you don't want to give it up until you absolutely have to or need to. Tip number 3, use your abilities and movement to become evasive from potential damage. Most abilities in Apex can be used in both offensive and defensive manners, and this is partially what makes Apex, well, Apex. Movement abilities are pretty straightforward when it comes to this concept, but saving your tactical or ultimate to escape a dicey situation is definitely a solid move, especially if you're the only legend on the team with any sort of mobility. But with that said, everything in Apex has a risk reward. You can't just expect to shoot a Pathfinder zipline in front of your enemies and make it out scot-free, just the same way you can expect an Ash portal will be completely safe if your enemy has you low and could just follow you through to the other side. As I like to tell players, hours. Apex is a game of seconds. So if getting out to some safety for 5 seconds just so you can pop a battery is all you need, then that's what you want to be facilitating. Space away from your enemies should equal time, and time to heal is really important when it comes to resetting in fights. You can also use abilities like Newcastle's Wall, Gibby's Bubble, Caustic Traps, Fuse's Ult, on and on to avoid taking damage by zoning off enemies or creating cover on the fly. Now, I won't get into each and every single ability here, but I think you get the point. Most legends have something they can do to either prevent damage or at the very least stall the fight so that you can have an opportunity to heal and do whatever else. Now, movement on the other hand is something much more tangible to be using during fights. Most mobility, in fact, I think all of it, if you take out abilities, doesn't have a cooldown. And I would go as far to say that movement's core utility in Apex is so that you'll take less damage during fights. Using mechanics such as a left to right strafe, crouching, slide jumping, and quickly interacting with ziplines is what will be most commonly used during a lot of your fights. These are pillars of movement in my opinion, and if you combine them with everything else I discussed in this video, then you will be well on your way to becoming cracked at this game. Tip number 4, always reload behind some bit of cover before you re-peek. If you're not doing this, it's where a lot of unnecessary damage can and will occur. If you watch your favorite content creators carefully, they will almost never reload in front of their enemies. They do this because they know it's just a free way for the opponent to get the better of them in the fight. Doors, walls, rocks, high ground, any sort of cover you are using or just close to is where you want to gravitate to if you need to reload. Now the good news is, if you learn to do this, you can and should couple it with healing as well. Great players will do the same thing but with healing. They never will heal in the open because they also know it's just asking to die. Now, of course, a lot of you guys watching this aren't healing in the wide open thinking, oh, my enemies won't do anything about it. But I will say that these habits in tip number 4 will help you become more mindful of your surroundings each fight. In this way, you will sort of always be assessing your available cover, and that's what I really want you to take away from this point. Remember, the time it takes to kill in Apex heavily coincides with the time it takes to heal. It's really important to understand both of these variables when gauging who to fight in Apex and why. I also want to say on the topic of healing, I recommend to nearly always be healing if you take any damage. Any significant damage, that is. But especially if you're doing so while solo queuing. You never want to think your random teammates are thinking what you are or that they're going to do the right thing. So take care of yourself first, and the way you do that is by never going in lower than you need to be in any given fight. Sometimes, and this will occur less often, but if the situation calls for it, you can cancel a heal if it means you're doing it so that you can help your teammate 2v1 your opponent. Or if the enemy is very low and is going to thirst your teammate and get their armor swap, then yes, in those moments, I would probably cancel the heal and try to take them out before they could do that. Tip number 5, facilitate the fights you want contingent off of your loadout. Look, this may seem like an obvious one, but I promise you guys, I wouldn't be mentioning any of these tips I have if I didn't still see them day in and day out in my games. If you're running a loadout of, let's say, a Volt and a Peacekeeper, then you are obviously using a pretty close range setup in nature. So you should not be entertaining fights that are anything beyond 40 to 50 meters. You should be solely focused on closing the gap to your enemies, and if you are being engaged by a team with snipers or marksman rifles, you either need to break their line of sight and leave the fight entirely, or get much closer to them while avoiding taking damage from them on the approach. I always tell players I coach, don't play into your opponent's hand like that. Look at what they have and how they would want to fight you and try to do the opposite. Now, if you're the one on the other side using the long range weapons, you should always pair it with something close range so that you're not completely neutralized when the enemy gets close to you. But you should be facilitating more space between you and your opponent with your long range weapons. Look for good angles that favor that type of playstyle and really take advantage of that positioning over your opponent. At a certain point in Apex, players reach a high enough skill ceiling where they can deal damage to anybody in their lobby. But Apex is a balance of dealing damage while simultaneously not taking a ton of it. This is where the skill gap will play a huge role in your games. If you're interested in increasing your skill gap and learning about these 10 mistakes getting you killed, well, I suggest you check out this video next. Thanks for watching. Peace.